Hello and welcome to Child Development. My name is Dr. Crystal Reboat, and today I will be presenting for you Chapter 1 of our textbook. You can follow along with your book, The World of Children by Cook and Cook 3rd edition, or you can follow along with our PowerPoint. I will be sharing with you my PowerPoint as I present, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now so that you can follow along. Okay. As I mentioned, we're going to start chapter 1. This chapter is called Exploring Child Development. So today what we are going to do is define the field of child development, go over different theories, research in the field, and also different careers related to children. So if you're taking this class, it's an elective class. It's probably because you are interested in children in some way. I can tell you a little bit about myself. I'm fascinated by children. In many ways, I probably am a child still, as many of us are. And I have children of my own. So I have twin boys, Aiden and Jaden, who you may hear running around in the background as I present. So I apologize preemptively for that. So before we begin, I want you to think about in what ways you may be different now as an adult than when you were a young child. So just go ahead and think about that for a second. Perhaps you're more responsible or you have more responsibility, you're more mature, but maybe in many respects, positive things that we had as children got lost, right? Like maybe our imaginations and our creativity, right? Magic, believing in magic, believing in just the innocence, or rather, I should say, having the innocence of a child. And believing in yourself, right? Because most kids do believe in themselves and have very high self esteem up until elementary school. So, we're going to talk all about that in this class. I want you to just think about in what ways are you still the same, and what factors do you think were most influential to your development? For example, perhaps your parents or a particular caregiver or a teacher. Okay, so child development is the field of study in which researchers from all areas, pediatrics, um, science, engineering, math, everything is related when we talk about childhood. And you may think, how is STEM related to this field? Well, it is, believe it or not. Even understanding how to teach science to a child is something that has been greatly researched. Politics are involved, right? When we say who has a stake in child development, everybody does, because children are the future of our world. So parents have a stake, teachers have a stake, pediatricians have a stake, all sorts of caregivers, right? From preschools to nurseries, everyone has a stake, but also politicians have a stake and policymakers, because what happens to children now in childhood has an effect in the future of our nation later on, when we talk about criminality, when we talk about drug abuse and teenage pregnancy and all these factors. They all stem from childhood. So who is at stake here? Everybody. This is why childhood is so vastly important. Okay, so what develops? In this book, we are going to be talking about development. Obviously, the class is child development, but we're going to be talking about it from three aspects. Physical development, which involves growth, not only in muscle and size, but also brain development, right? So we're going to be talking about what happens to our neurons or brain cells as they grow as we get older. Cognitive development, which is also the development of thinking, right? So the brain development is also cognitive, but here we're talking more about the way children think. So we're going to go over different cognitive theories, how children perceive the world, how they organize information in their minds, how they remember or retain information. So that's called memory. And my specialty, which is language. So how children communicate. And just to tell you a little bit about myself, my PhD is in developmental psychology with a specialty in language development. Now, this is a research oriented field, so I do not do therapy in children. I'm not a clinician, but we're going to talk about that in a second. So, child development is a career that is based on research and empirical evidence. So, social development, that's for boys and girls, puppy. But right now, we're not going to play with that because mommy's working, okay? So, cognitive development is, again, how we retain information, how we communicate. It's about language. It's everything involving the brain of the child, the mind. And then there's social emotional development. This is how children interact with others. So when we talk about pro-social behavior, interacting with others, how kids manage their emotions, how they regulate their emotions, right? I point to my prefrontal cortex. We're going to be talking all about this. Okay, so that's what this class is about, and I hope that you do find it interesting as I do, as passionate as I am. This class takes a biopsychosocial approach, which means it is multifaceted. We don't just look at one single theory, we incorporate all our theories. So, development is influenced by biology, which means your genetics, your blood, your heritability. It's also involved by psychological factors, which means how we think and interpret the world, and also social, which is those people who influence us the most. All right, you're going to see several themes throughout the course. One of the biggest themes that you're going to find, and this is what your first discussion is about, is on nature versus nurture. So, nature in this respect means genetics, right? When you think nature, I don't want you to think the environment. Take that out of your mind because environment is not trees and plants in this course. Environment in this course means nurture, which means how our parents influence us. So, nature is our genes, our heritability, where we inherit things from our parents, and nurture is our environment in the sense of who cares for us, how do they influence us, right? So, behavioral influences and factors that are learned. That's what we refer to when we say nurture. So both of them interact to form our development. Now, there's a huge debate saying which one influences development more. The answer here is neither, right? They both work together. However, when it does come to certain factors like intelligence or personality, um, in some respects, or even some disorders, in some respects, we're going to see that nature has a stronger effect. When it comes to other factors, we're going to see nurture may have a strong effect, but the two are not mutually exclusive. They influence each other, and they both influence development in a great way. So then we talk about the role of neuroscience. Here, this is how the structure and function of the brain and the nervous system. Okay, so neurology, meaning everything that's going on inside of our brains, from the development of brain cells, which we call neurons, to how those brain cells communicate with each other through neurotransmitters and neural connections. We're going to talk all about that. This field also investigates how culture plays a role in development. And this is huge. You can think about how your culture has influenced you in a great way. And then finally, we talk about increasing positive psychology or research in positive psychology, resilience, which is how to be okay despite negative influences in our life, right? So those who come out on top, even though they kind of had everything working against them, that's what resilience is. And there's a lot of research on that. So moving right along, theories in child development. Now, when I use the word theory in this class or in any scientific class, a theory in fact is based off of empirical evidence. So this is not the way you use the word theory in lay terms. This is a theory is research based. It's empirically evidenced. It has years of different peer-reviewed research to back it up. So it may not be called fact because science is never proven nor disproven. It is instead evidenced. Okay, so this is theories of child development are different perspectives that have a lot of research evidence to support them. So we use theories to help organize facts. What is a theory? As I just said, it's an explanation of how facts fit together. they help us predict future behavior. So if I'm looking at something, for example, from a behavioral perspective, behavioral theory has a lot of support. So when I use behavioral theory, I am using it to help me predict what's going to happen next. So I may look at a child and I say, okay, well, that's a learned behavior. So if that behavior gets reinforced, then most likely this is going to be the outcome afterwards. So theories help provide a foundation for research, and they help us identify relevant information and help us organize it into different perspectives. So in this class, we're going to go over 6 different theories. Okay, we're going to start with our psychoanalytic theory, which encompasses several theories within behavioral theory, and our social learning theories. So as I mentioned, we're going to go over 6 different theories. The first 3 you see on the screen here. The last 3 are going to be cognitive, biological, and contextual systems theory. So those are the 6 theories, but within each theory, you're going to see different theorists, different people who proposed support for each theory. So we'll start with the most famous, who you've probably heard of many times, and that's going to be psychoanalytical theory by Sigmund Freud. So Freud was one of the founding fathers of this theory. He focused on personality and how conscious and unconscious thoughts influence behavior and development. But then after Freud, we did have a few of his successors who slightly altered his theory to different stages. So Freud was a stage theorist. He was a psychosexual theorist, which means he focused on different sexual components of development. And by sexual, I don't necessarily mean intercourse. What I mean here is he focused on fixations. So he's a stage theorist, which means at different ages the child will go through different stages. So his first stage he called the oral stage. This is ages 0 to 2, and this is where the infant has fixation on their mouth. 0 through 2, what is going on during that stage? Well, breastfeeding is one of the first things babies do when they come into this world. They seek oral gratification by sucking, biting, and eventually by talking or babbling first, then talking. What's happening is at this stage, 0 to 2, we are surviving mainly on reflexes. So, sucking, swallowing, choking, those are all reflexes that we don't necessarily need to be taught. But as we do them, we receive gratification. So, as we suck, for example, as a baby sucks on his mother's breast, he receives breast milk, and then that is gratifying to him. So, what else happens during this stage? Well, teething, right? Babies start to bite because their teeth are coming in. And so, again, the fixation in the mouth. You see that parents use pacifiers as a way to soothe or pacify this fixation, right? And also as a way to prevent the child from choking on small objects because everything is going to go to their mouth at this stage. So Freud did have accuracy and merit in mentioning this stage. He also felt that if this stage wasn't successfully accomplished, meaning that if the child didn't go through this because the parent didn't let them, soothe that need, then he felt that children would remain in that stage for the remainder of their life. So, for example, Freud would be very pro pacifier because he would say that pacifiers would help soothe this gratification. If a child was stripped of a pacifier when he needed it, he's going to try to put everything else in his mouth, whether it's his thumb, his fingers, or objects. And then what happens is those are people that chew pencils, that bite their nails, that do all sorts of things to try and ease that gratification or that need. So after that stage, from 2 to 3, Freud calls this the anal stage. And during the anal stage, this is where potty training happens, and this is where kids discover their private parts. So during this stage, So during the anal stage, potty training helps toddlers balance their need for basically touching their private parts, because this is perfectly normal at this stage, and discovering them. Next comes the phallic stage, which is ages 3 to 7. And this is where Freud says that babies fall in love with their opposite sex parent. Not only do they have this unconscious desire, but they also begin to identify with their same sex parent. So little boys want to be just like their daddies, little girls want to be just like their mommies during this phallic stage. After this comes the latency period. This is ages 7 to 11, and this is where Freud believes that sexual urges are being repressed, and that the child is going to prefer always same sex companions. So ages 7 to 11, that's elementary school. This is when the opposite sex tends to have cooties and boys say no girls allowed, girls say no boys allowed, right? Girls rule and boys drool, so to speak. um, Freud took it a step further by saying that they were suppressing their sexual urges. Other theorists believe that babies do, or not babies, children at this age do experiment with the opposites. And then finally comes adolescence, which Freud believes was the last stage, and he started it at age 11. Other theorists believe adolescence comes a little later, but he calls that the genital stage, so ages 11 to adult. Now this is when puberty starts to occur, and it doesn't mean that the child is having sex. It doesn't necessarily mean that the child is ready for intercourse, but he or she is definitely going through puberty. So what's happening is that sexual urges reappear, and the adolescent is going to start to learn about more mature relationships. So Freud and some other theorists as well, they end their stages here in adolescence because they focus on that early development. We see that Piaget does this too. However, Freud's uh, successor, the one who came after him, Erickson, he believed in he had stages all the way up to death. Okay, so just a little more information on Freud. He believed that the unconscious was made up of three entities: the id, the ego, and the superego. So you probably remember this from Intro to Psych. The id is completely unconscious. So these are primitive instincts, our animal instincts, so to speak. If you think of the devil and the angel on your shoulder, the id would be the devil. He's the one that's saying, survival, reproduction, do whatever you have to do to survive. Then the angel is the super ego. This is the one that's ethical, moral, conscious, right? The one that is telling you right from how to do right from wrong. So the id is going to be the primitive instincts, the super ego is the ethics, the morals, the right from wrong. And then in the middle we have rational thought. So that's going to be the ego. That's your rationality, saying what to do in the case of your primitive instincts kicking in. So, for example, you're walking down the street, somebody bumps you on the shoulder. Your id is going to be the one to say, hey, turn around and, punch them in the face or see what's up, right? Your super ego is going to be like, oh, well, maybe it was just an accident. Move on with your life. Your ego is your rationality. That's you saying, was it on purpose? Was it by accident? How do I react? Maybe I should turn around and say something, but in a polite way. So Freud said that we are constantly in a battle between the id and the super ego. And the ego is the rationality, the what kind of drives our behavior um on the outside, right? Where we have all this underlying stuff, right? Like an iceberg, all the underlying stuff driving our behavior. So we're in a constant state of conflict. All right, that's Freud in a nutshell. You guys definitely have to read up more, and read your book, and definitely explore the different links that I have for you on Blackboard, because that's really going to help you understand this more. Okay, so then we have Erickson. He came after Freud. He was like, look, you have a lot of merit in what you're saying, but there's more to development than just, sexual development and the psychosexual unconscious that you're saying. So Erickson took it a step further and he turned it into psychosocial developmental theory. He proposed 8 stages. He said that infants act upon their caregivers. Um, or sorry, he said that caregivers influence our development, and infants are seeking this bond, and it's not a bond that they want, it's a bond that they need. So he revised Freud's theory to focus more on healthy child development, and he proposed 8 stages. So his stages, as we go into our further chapters of the book, every single stage is going to be broken down into physical, cognitive, social, emotional development. And within social, emotional development, we're going to talk about each of Erickson's theories. But just to give you a preview, the first stage is trust versus mistrust. And this is where a baby is simply developing a bond with his mother or her mother. It is hyper important. It is the basis for attachment theory, which John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth formulated later on. Very, very important. We'll talk about that later. Erik Erickson formed different stages, and he, like Freud, said that you cannot successfully move on to the next stage until you accomplish the first one. So in trust versus mistrust, the baby is developing a bond with his mother. Right, later on, we see autonomy versus shame and doubt. This is where 2-year-olds want to be independent and they want to do it by themselves. My kid's favorite word when they were 2 was solito, which in Spanish means by myself. And every time they tried to do anything, it was solito, 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 right? Let me do it by myself, mommy. And as a parent of twin toddlers, that was extremely frustrating, especially when you were in a hurry. But guess what? It's a normal part of development. And if I didn't allow them to do things by themselves, then they would develop shame and doubt, which is the opposite. It's this conflict that says, well, I can't do it. I'm incapable. So then when they move on to the third stage, which is initiative versus guilt, the children who learned how to do things by themselves became autonomous. They then take initiative as preschoolers to do things like making their bed or brushing their teeth by themselves or getting dressed by themselves. Why? Because they became autonomous when they were supposed to. Those who were not autonomous, they developed shame and doubt. Then in the next stage, they feel guilty that they can't do it. So they have this guilt that I'm incapable, and I'm just not even going to bother trying. Okay, moving on after that, we have identity versus role confusion. So the children who successfully believe in themselves, become autonomous, take initiative, they start to develop their identity in a positive way, in a form of this is what I am capable of, this is what I'm not capable of. And I apologize, I missed a stage before identity versus role confusion. So here are the stages for you to see. Before identity versus role confusion, that's actually adolescence. I apologize, I skipped one. Elementary school is industry versus inferiority. So as I was saying, it still remains. Those who take initiative, who believe in themselves, they start to develop this sense of industriousness, which means I am capable of doing this. I'm good at this. I'm bad at that. So in elementary school, that's when this happens. We say, I'm good at soccer, but I'm bad at math, or I'm good at reading, but I'm bad at I don't know, writing or Spanish or whatever. So they develop this sense of what they're good at. That's called industry. And then what they feel that they're not good at, they develop a sense of inferiority. So during that stage, during elementary school, kids invariably will compare themselves to other kids. It happens without even adults helping them. It's worse when adults say, look at your brother, he did this, why can't you do it? So identity versus confusion is going to be adolescence. And then after that, Erickson goes on to explain adulthood. Now, this class doesn't cover adulthood, but you can see the 3 remaining stages there. Intimacy versus isolation, meaning, being able to find a partner. Remember, he is a psychosocial theorist, so he focused a lot on our relationships. After that, generativity versus stagnation. Excuse me, this is in our in our 40s to 60s, do we feel stagnant, meaning like we haven't accomplished what we wanted to, or do we feel generativity, meaning we feel productive, we feel like our life goals have been met? And then after that is old age, which is integrity versus despair. If you lived a life that was fulfilling, with fulfilling relationships, you had kids, grandkids, you have family members who care about you, then he says that you will successfully accomplish integrity. Some people do have those things and they still feel despair, which means they don't feel that meaningfulness in their life, and the end of their life is filled with anguish and despair that they didn't live the life that they wanted. So Erik Erickson proposed these 8 stages of psychosocial development. After them, or I should say concurrently around the same time, we also had behavioral theories coming to play. So these were people who were less focused on our unconscious thoughts and our relationships and our psychosocial development. They weren't so worried about that. They were more worried about observable behavior, how a child acts, what influences this behavior, what influences how they think, how they act, and what they learn. So the behavioral theorists, the main ones, were Watson, Skinner, and Bandura, and each had a different theory of behaviorism. So starting with Watson, he discovered what we call classical conditioning. Now, all the behavioral theorists are people who focused on learning or conditioning, or how we again, how our behavior is influenced by our environments. So these are I'm sorry, these are nurture theorists. Nurture meaning environment, people who focused on what is learned either through conditioning or through imitation. So, starting number one with Watson. Watson discovered classical conditioning theory. We're going to talk about that in a second. Then we have Skinner, who developed operant conditioning. Both are conditioning means learning. Okay. So, conditioning through classical conditioning is learning through association. That was John Watson. We're going to talk about the Pavlov's experiments as well. He was Ivan Pavlov was also a classical conditioning theorist. And then so Watson and Pavlov were classical conditioning. Skinner was operant conditioning, which is learning through reinforcement and punishment. This is very, very important for our class. And then finally we have Albert Bandura, who focused on social learning theory. And this is learning through observation and imitation. Okay, so these 3 theories I'm going to go over in a lot more detail. And I want you to really look at those links that I have up for you guys, because each theory is explained in a lot more detail.